it. But we're going to pivot here because we've got Commissioner Brent Bailey. He, of course, is the Public Service Commissioner of Mississippi's Central District. Morning there, Commissioner. Much bigger name on the other line you had to take, right?
I had to let it go, man. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for coming in today, sir. So how about filling us in? Give us an update from the Central District, what you guys got going on.
Man, where do you want to start?
You tell me. You're in charge.
Well, I know there's several topics that were brought up to be discussed, and we can certainly jump into those as it comes into your head and where you want to go.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest things, the biggest issue we had last week, we rolled our Public Utility Infrastructure Review Report. Brought you a copy. You can thumb through at your leisure. Okay. And what it was a culmination of a year of review and investigation and looking at the events that culminated last February 2021, the big winter storms that hit across the state caused a lot of outages of electricity, water, even disruptions of telecommunications, some aspects, and we didn't hardly see any part of the state that was not impacted by that. Okay. Brought travel to a standstill, and that really was the motivation behind the commission really jumping in and making sure, hey, just how, did we do everything we could? Did the utilities do everything they could to prevent such a widespread, large area outage of these events? Mm-hmm. And what can we do going forward to prevent that, to be aware? And I think the bottom line is, while there's no doubt some recommendations and findings in this that I think will be helpful going forward, I truly believe that we did determine that the utilities, for the most part, really did their best. We're ready for that, put pieces in place, did a lot of pre-planning, good response, but at the same time, in responding to these outages and doing certain things, you got to put health and safety first. Last thing you want to do is put the people who are working to restore these services in harm's way, unnecessarily. And I know that may have led to a day or two longer on restoring certain services, but you got to be aware that you got to do it as quickly and safely as possible. There's no doubt we saw from the extended cold period we had there are some things we do that we can to protect that critical infrastructure going forward. It's going to require some investments, which could be some minor rate impacts along the way. You never know. Yeah. It may be a way to absorb some of those costs to ensure that we have continued resiliency in the system going forward. And it may be something want to differentiate between reliability, which we talk a lot of, and resiliency. And in my view, those are two totally separate things. Reliability is the confidence you have in walking to your room, your kitchen, whatever it is, and flip on the switch, lights come on, turn on the tap, water flows, turn on the knob on your gas top stove, the gas ignites. Mm-hmm. And you never question that in our state or in much of the U.S. I mean, that's just the confidence we've had over years and years and years of this quality of life and standard of living that we expect that the utilities have done a good job in providing. Resiliency so reliability is the ability for these services to be available in time of normal conditions. Resiliency is the ability of these services to be functional, or the ability to restore them in a short amount of time during times of abnormal and extreme conditions. Yeah. And I think our utilities, through the continuous work they do, through the planning process and protocols and the people they have in place, so many folks behind the scenes are every day going through drills and scenarios to, make these preparations for what an extreme event could look like. No doubt in Mississippi, we no stranger to those, whether it's ice storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, extended heat waves, and even some issues that we're going to have to take some additional looks at is the cyber as well as physical threat issues around infrastructure.
So there are widespread reports from various sources about the aging infrastructure, particularly our electrical infrastructure in this country overall. How does it look in Mississippi?
Yeah, I saw some of those headlines over the weekend. Yeah. I think it was Wall Street Journal and others. There's no doubt that maintaining O&M is a continual process. And I know our utilities, the electrical, they all have annual condition reviews on their system, and they try to identify those weaknesses or spots where there could be compromises along the way, and work to move them up the queue for replacement or attention, whether it's reconductoring the lines or at least the new poles. Something the PSC did just a couple months ago. We gave Entergy the permission to accelerate their transmission infrastructure replacement program, to accelerate movement from 29 years replacing all their wooden transmission structures to decreasing it down to within 11 years at a very minimal 14 cents a month impact on rates. And that upgrades the wind loading as well as ice loading standards of these new components that are replacing ones that's been in place in there 30, 40, 50, maybe even 60 years.
Yeah.
So that's going to greatly improve resiliency throughout our infrastructure network.
What about transition to underground?
Undergrounding, you're seeing a lot of that done on the coasts, Florida, California, the Northeast. No doubt it has advantages and benefits. It also has significant costs associated with it as well.
Yeah.
Given, Mississippi, very rural state, certainly may make sense in licenses in the coastal counties. It could be very difficult to justify financially throughout the rest of the state. Understanding we are, not just rural, but we also grow vegetation very well here in the state. And vegetation management along the right-of-ways, whether it's distribution or transmission, is something that has to be evaluated quite frequently. And are the rotations adequate? As a 2-year trimming cycle, 4-year, 3, 5. Yeah. Different states have, different sections of the state, depending on the topography, depending on the type of vegetation. You got to be aware of that. Also, things like invasive species, kudzu will cover up your car if you leave it sitting there long enough. Yeah. And those are things that these guys have to accommodate for in certain parts of the state.
Yeah, I got you. All right, makes sense. Well, you're also saying something else I want to ask you about is New York City. Now, I know it's a long way away from here, and they're totally different than Mississippi. But really the question is it's a trend we can expect to see, and that is earlier this month, their city council banned new installation of new connections for gas-powered stoves and other appliances in newly constructed buildings. I want to say San Francisco recently did the same. Is this something we're going to see as a trend? Is that something we might see in Mississippi?
Mississippi, the legislature in the last couple of years have taken steps to avoid that, to preempt that, to disallow communities, municipalities, and others from advancing and implementing those type of things. So we kind of put in a all fuels opportunities bill that's in place to prevent that from happening at local level. Good. So we won't see that here in Mississippi.
All right, we got a break right here. We'll come back. I want to ask you about these rising utility rates we're all feeling right now. We got Commissioner Brent Bailey. He commissions the public service in the Central District. We'll be right back. Public Service Commissioner Brent Bailey is our guest in the SuperTalk Studios. We appreciate, as always, him joining us today. All right, so you talked in the last segment about how improvements in electrical infrastructure, for example, to increase resiliency, I think the main objective there, and you did a great job explaining the difference between reliability and resiliency, which, by the way, that same concept applies in the IT world. So, makes total sense.
It gets those terms get interchanged and used a lot, but there is a distinct difference between the two.
Totally agree, and that was excellent. So, but you said something about rate increases as a way to cover those additional capital investments to improve the infrastructure. Explain to us, how does that work exactly? So if a utility company needs to make significant investment to improve that infrastructure, say going from wood poles to, I guess, concrete or metal, as you discussed in the last segment.
Yep.
How do the ratepayers pay for that? Do they have to get permission from the PSC to increase rates? How does that structure work?
That's correct, because it does have a material impact on those rates and what that looks like. There is, for those certain programs such as this, and it's called the Resiliency Ramp-Up Program through Entergy, provided us the details on what that looks like, looked at the economic impact of what that was. It was 14 cents per per 100,000. Per 1,000 kilowatt hours.
Okay.
To advance and accelerate the replacement of that infrastructure. That's just one example. Let's look at say water utilities. We did see in the February winter storm approximately 80 water systems around the state, various sizes, had low to no water pressure for various reasons. Okay. Some of it could have been, power went out, they didn't have backup generator systems, or the backup generations there, but they didn't operate. Yeah. Or the pump well heads and things like that are exposed to the elements and not protected, not insulated, froze up. Had other instances where components just failed. To replace those, to put in the protection devices or update those systems is going to take a capital expenditure in many cases. And it's up to the operators as well as those customers' bases to determine is that investment worth it to ensure during the next major event that those systems are there when we need them.
So what kind of latitude does the utility provider have in increasing rates to, say, cover those investments, and when do they have to seek authority and approval from the commission?
Well, and I also like to remind folks that our regulatory authority is not universal. We do have our 5 rate-regulated entities or fully regulated utilities, Mississippi Power, Entergy, CenterPoint, Atmos Gas, and Spire Energy, which is kind of South Mississippi. We fully regulate all systems of them. Okay. When you get down to rural electric cooperatives, rural water associations, municipal utilities, utility districts, we certainly have differences in many cases. We don't have authority over rates, billing, and internal governance, particularly for those utilities that self-elect board members to represent their interests, such as rural electric cooperatives, rural water associations. And then with municipal utilities, that we see that regulatory oversight step down even a bit more there. Right. And it's just, I know it gets confusing to customers who call our office and looking for assistance, and it's frustrating to me sometimes to have to explain that there's certain things I can and can't do by statutory authority. Yeah. But it's not to say we'll do everything in our power and our efforts to help assist a customer when they do call. So getting back to the rate issue question, certainly for those rate-regulated utilities, they come to us with those programs, and here's what we would like to do. And we evaluate them, the cost benefits, are these prudent investments going forward, and then allow some kind of return schedule on that for whatever.
Is there ever a situation where the utility provider can just raise rates without permission from your regulatory authority?
There are certain, I wouldn't say yes or no. There's certain pass-through costs that are certainly expected of that may be pushed down from federal level through a FERC order or something along those lines. We're certainly aware of those. We may or may not have the ability to block that per se. Yeah. But there are some federal instances where that becomes a mandatory pass-through cost that we factor in there when we're looking at the formula rate plan and how all the costs go into that. But those are few and far between.
Well, so what? I guess the question is, though, what is to what extent can they just pass on market increases, the market changes, and let's say gas, for example, natural gas.
And that's something I guess you kind of lead into. We have seen the increase in rates, and that is direct impact from the increase in natural gas over the last 12 months, and and what projected recovery would be from the utilities. And maybe that didn't always match up based on their projections over the last 12 months of what that cost of fuel would be, what it actually was, and now we have to allow them to recover those under-recovered costs because we did see gas get up in the $6 range, and a large part of that just for a very condensed time last February. We saw natural gas spike tremendously, and it had a ripple effect across the country as we saw supplies diminish in the southeast, particularly Texas, and that's where the hub is. And in Louisiana, that area, and it kind of went out from there. While supply never really went away, it certainly increased the risk factor cost of that.
What about electricity when the source of those electric producing plants might be a commodity such as coal or gas?
Yeah, so natural gas, natural gas is the fuel primary fuel for a large part of our not just generation fleet, but the energy generated, the capacity component of that.
Yeah.
And so we have to allow them to recover those costs. Those are money's already expended to purchase that fuel, to generate that power.
Yeah.
And the recovery mechanism, because we didn't foresee them, or the utilities in their 12-month plan may not have foresaw a significant jump in that. Those carryover costs now in 2022 are allowing them to recover that. Despite the price of gas has sort of settled back down somewhat, it's still higher than it was last year, or even on average over the last 6 to 7 to 8 years. And is that the new normal? We're unsure.
Yeah.
But it's something we're going to have to account for going forward.
But the main thing is the utility provider, in this case the electrical provider, they don't have to come to the commission and say, look, we're paying more for gas that we're consuming to generate electricity. We need to raise the rates here. They don't have to do that.
Yes, they do.
They do have to
do. I mean, because we look at the mechanisms they're using, because they all have tools. They do hedging, forward contracting, that kind of stuff. Some up to X amount, some not. And we look at, are these the best ways to recover these costs? Are you adequately planning ahead? Did your under recovery, what did it look like? What do you need over the next 12 months to level that out so you're not having significant over recovery of ratepayer dollars, and you're not having significant under recovery ratepayer dollars, and then you got to apply a carrying cost to that. So it's always, you want to be net zero at the end of the 12 months. So, through our utility staff and their economists and our folks, there is sort of there is that review.
Okay, so
while it is a pass-through cost for natural gas, they don't earn revenues on fuel costs. We still got to make sure that how they're calculating it, how they're purchasing it, and how they're recovering those costs is appropriate.
I guess it seems like it's been very active, and I'm talking about just the fluctuations and the volatility in the price of gas, certainly over the last 12 months. Mm-hmm. Do they come then on a regular basis? Is it frequent that they come and say, look, this is what it looks like. This is our plan to recover?
So it has been annually. And does that create surprises? You hate to use that word, but it certainly was. We saw this coming, but that was a mechanism in place. With the latest approval of their fuel costs, the rate recovery aspect, we did include in this order a review every 3 months or every 90 days. For the utilities to come back and say, this is where we are in our recovery component. This is what we are anticipating fuel cost to be. This is where fuel costs are. So it does give us a little flexibility over the next year to adjust if we need to.
So recent increases that folks have been texting us about, and myself included, I'm sure you as well, you've seen that. That's a result of a recently approved rate increase?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It was. When all said and done, through even some rate decreases, when you look at all the riders and the factors going there, is a net of, for an Entergy customer, approximately $7 and something cents. I can't remember the actual right now.
Okay. So we'll just hang on and see where all this is going, because it continues to be volatile.
It does, certainly. And hopefully we have the mechanisms in place to reduce that volatility and plan for it. And we have other opportunities to continue to diversify our fuel mix as we see just generation fleet transition.
Gotcha.
And, maintaining a reliable, resilient service is certainly key that is affordable and accessible and adequate.
Commissioner Brent Bailey has been our guest. As always, sir, appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Middays, we'll be right back. We've got Senator David Blunt coming in at 12:05 and some tickets to get.